Thanks for the introduction. So this work, so I'll be presenting on gendered and racial experiences of moral distress. And this is based on research, a scoping review we conducted last year with co-authors Julia Smith, Rosemary Morgan, and Hasina Samji, and recently published. I want to acknowledge that this work was conducted on the unceded and traditional territories of the Squamish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and nations. The goal of the scoping review was to investigate if and how gender and racial analysis has been incorporated in moral distress research and consequently inform efforts to integrate gender and race into moral distress research. What is moral distress? So in general, it is challenging arising from being unable to provide care that one believes is required and ethical, typically towards patient care. And this arises from a number of factors, including ethical or moral judgment that are different from those in charge, especially if you don't have power to make decisions of the care you're providing, but also resource constraints and morally troubling situation that make it unable to provide care. Outcomes that have been highlighted as resulting from moral distress include emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, burnout, and even turnover in tension. And this is very relevant in today's context where we do not have adequate healthcare providers. So we want to keep the workers there. So this is an important issue that we saw kind of need to be addressed. Our methodological framework was extension for a scoping review. We included literature that provided original findings, so no literature review, just quantitative approach methods that focus on experiences of healthcare providers or trainees, papers that are peer-reviewed and published between 2012 and 2022, and those that were published in English due to our language limitation. We searched for papers that provided information on moral distress as it pertains to gender and or race. We used PubMed, Sinhal, and websites to do our search. Our search resulted in 482 papers. Once we screened on duplicates and eligibility, we analyzed 73 literature. And just to offer kind of a general description of the articles we found, most of the articles we found were published more recently from 2019. And we kind of realized there is a trend of either an increase in research in moral distress or increase in analysis of gender and race in moral distress. And just to note that the 2022 papers represented what we searched in June 2022. So there probably is one that is out there. Most papers focused on intensive care, like moral distress in that context, and also on nurses, most especially, but also clinicians, trainees, and other professionals. Most studies were conducted in the US, Iran, followed by UK, Canada, and other contexts shown in that. In our findings, we saw that most papers actually address gender or sex in experiences of moral distress, but 28 also addressed race or ethnicity when it comes to moral distress experience. We found that kind of only one of the papers that looked at race and ethnicity did not address gender and sex. So we saw more kind of research bias towards sex and gender. What our analysis or the themes that we came up with were based on how this research was conducted and presented regarding race and gender analysis. We found that most papers actually just counted this kind of demographic data without considering it. So, for instance, a paper could say that we found our participants were X percent of our participants were male or Black, but no other thing about that demographic information. When it came to sex and gender, there were papers which really looked at gender professions. So looking at how the healthcare sector in itself represents represent or reflects the gender roles of especially female or women being care providers. And others used female theories and methodologies, so they applied them. For instance, one paper that applied feminist political economy showed a link between the increase and focus on efficiency into kind of cutting that human connection or emotional support in providing care, contributing to moral distress experiences. Three of the papers, however, that looked into these feminist theories did not interrogate how the gender of the participants who were looking at actually affected their moral distress experience. And also just to note, some papers were categorized in like more than one of these things. So for instance, some papers on feminist theories interrogated gender and sex, but others just counted and offered these kind of theoretical perspectives. So the more interesting papers we found looked more into what this kind of gender or race means when it comes to experiences of moral distress. So some highlighted, so they just highlighted to say that, for example, females or women experience more moral distress or compared to their male men counterparts, and others really went into at the how. When we look at the gender sex differences that were highlighted, it showed that there was a mixed finding. So some papers, some research showed that women, female workers had higher measures, experienced higher moral distress compared to their male men counterparts, and others found vice versa, while others found no significant differences. But these were not always straightforward. For example, in one study that found that males reported higher moral distress scores, this was only found to be statistically significant when comparing moderate or high moral distress frequency scores. In another paper that found no significant difference, gender difference in lived experience, at the end found that women more than men reported the intention of leaving their work due to moral distress. And also two studies that found higher moral distress among male or men noted potential bias in their sample. One said that men were overrepresented in their sample, and another were underrepresented. So in either case, they found higher moral distress among their male participants. So that, as mixers want to know the how, the why. So there were 13 papers which kind of dived in, which help us identify two things that contribute to gendered moral distress experience. And one was on gender roles and expectation. So they describe gender as a social construct where women are seen as caregivers, and hence in the healthcare setting, this translates to direct care to patients, hence making them kind of more susceptible to moral distress experience when providing care. Where the men are more like have more control, more power as physicians, for example, where they're overrepresented, including here in Canada in the healthcare system, and so it creates that kind of gender hierarchy of power in the healthcare system, where nurses, for instance, are expected to accept the authority of physicians and hence lower control of the care they provide. There was one paper also hinted to the conflict between demands of paid and unpaid care work, where emotional exhaustion from unpaid work home contribute to one being able to provide required care. Two papers also tied both experiences and reporting of moral distress to gender expectations. For example, men's expectations of being strong and rational potentially resulting in them downplaying the experiences of moral distress, and conversely also might make them more kind of vulnerable to moral distress. Another thing that came up was the gender-based violence and discrimination, which was based on kind of the gender identity, sexual orientation, and childcare responsibility. Sexism was experienced as sexual harassment, and questioning of professional capacity, where age and position of power, for example, female musicians, was seen as a moderator. And lastly, regarding race and ethnicity, it highlighted this and noted also kind of a mixed finding there. But this was not always straightforward. For example, in one study that found that Black and Asian workers experienced lower emotional exhaustion, these same workers reported lower perception of personal accomplishment. The other study that showed that older Caucasian female with more nursing experience reported the highest means of moral distress did not show what degree race actually contributed to this experience. For those that interrogated, we highlighted two things, so racism and class. So noting that a replication of societal and racial power relations are replicated in the healthcare systems, both systemic racism, but also racism regarding to patient and questioning of professional capacity. And also another point was ethnic affiliation and cultural beliefs that heighten sensitivity to patient narrative. For instance, in one study in the US, Hispanic care providers really felt bad when they couldn't provide care to undocumented patients who are not covered for specific care. And what this showed, the implication that this study had was both on research and policy. So it highlighted the need not only to collect, but utilize demographic data in analysis, and clearly define this demographic data and social identity under examination. For example, in many studies, sex and gender was conflated. And also it highlighted the importance of incorporating intersectionality analysis that also examines the role of power and structural inequalities. And also what we noted was that the mixed method studies was better placed to interrogate experiences of moral distress. At the policy level, attrition has been linked to moral distress, hence addressing it could potentially ease our healthcare crisis. But there is, and to address this, there is need for a nuanced approach. For example, targeted gender and anti-racist approaches. Please see our paper for more kind of detailed analysis of this. And thank you for your attention.